Africa's largest air carrier, Ethiopian Airlines, says it will start constructing a new $5 billion airport later this year. This is according to its chief executive officer. The airport, which will cover an area of 35 square kilometers, will be built in Bishoftu, a town 39 kilometers southeast of the capital, and have the capacity to handle 100 million passengers a year. Bole International Airport in Addis Ababa has a passenger capacity of about 19 million passengers annually. Media reports claim the price tag of the new airport is higher than the $4 billion cost of building the still-to-be-completed Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Nile, with the projected passenger numbers topping those at Dubai's International Airport as well. Now, Ghana has signed a memorandum of understanding with the multinational giant Siemens to upgrade the country's electricity grid using 250 million euros of financing from Germany. The MoU was signed by Siemens and the Ghana Grid Company Limited in the presence of the President of the Republic, Nana Akufo-Addo, and the President and Global Chief Executive Officer of Siemens, Joe Kaeser. Under the agreement, the two companies will work collaboratively to upgrade and extend Ghana's transmission infrastructure, improve the country's grid capacity and stability, enable and also expand a stable power export to neighbouring countries in the West African power pool. And CEO of Alpha African Advisory, Sanyade Okoli, joins me now for more on these stories. Sanyade, it's good to have you. Good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
All right, let's take a look at the Ghana-Siemens collaboration here. The significance of this MoU was 250 million euros from the German side. So what do you make of that development?
It's a very positive development. If you think about it, Ghana has been a bit of a poster child when it comes to electricity over the last 4 or 5 years at the very least. So if we look at the generation in about 2015, it was about 2.4, 2.5 megawatts, gigawatts. Now, as it's 2019, it was more like 4.7, 4.8. So they've almost doubled it in about 5 years. Okay. But what's happened is they've gone from a position of not having enough power to satisfy their local needs, to having excess. So right now, in terms of local demand, it's about 60%. And they had set themselves a target of actually increasing their export of electricity to Burkina Faso, Togo, and Benin Republic. So this is essentially in line with their strategic intent, and it's positive.
Yeah, it's good. That's a good development. I remember not too long ago, I think Nigeria was also in the habit of exporting electricity, despite our domestic challenges, as it were, to neighbouring African countries. So it is a good development, like you said. Now, let's talk about the benefits of having more foreign investors in the nation's power sector. What do you make of that scenario?
Well, as you mentioned, the Ghana Grid Co. already has a debt issue, about 170 million or so. Yeah, and yes, and obviously, to expand the network or to do anything, capital is what is required. So if they're not limited to what is available in the local market, then all the better.
And earlier we were talking about the exportation of power to other neighbouring states with this upgrade. So in the long term, what does that tell you? Fine, you have a bit of shortfall on your domestic market, but then you're still trying to expand.
No, but as I said, right now, they don't have the shortfall.
They're thinking about it. So
they're thinking about what?
Yeah, on expanding that and exporting to other countries.
So that's what I'm saying. So they've reached a stage where they've satisfied their domestic needs and have surplus to be able to export. And at the end of the day, the exportation of electricity is like the exportation of cocoa or gold, etc. It's, brings in income. So I think all the better for them, really.
Yeah, and you don't find many Africans, countries actually having that capacity to export.
Essentially.
So that was the point I was trying to make there in that regard. So what would you regard as the main challenge to Africa's power sector? Perhaps state control, you think?
No, actually, I think it's more general than that. I think it's actually mindset. I think, Ghana, with this example, has shown us that once you make your mind up, then you do all that is required to make something happen. So, for example, over the last, since the 80s and to a great extent more recently, they've liberalized the market, so you have greater generation. And again, we've seen where they've essentially made statements of intent. This is our target, this is our goal, this is what we're trying to achieve, and they've worked towards it. Yeah. So what we need is similar will, political will, in other parts of Africa where they say, actually, this is what we want to do, and we're going to do all that is required, sometimes uncomfortable, to make it happen. It's, that's just clear mindset, set the vision, and execute.
Indeed. It's interesting you should mention that, a clear mindset, but you see countries with bigger economies, like South Africa and Nigeria as well, they're not thinking of that. It's all about the state control, a little bit of unbundling here, but not clear liberalization, just like you mentioned.
So remember I said mindset. I think one of the key things that need to happen is a more holistic understanding of how different factors in our economy affect each other. Right. And, thanks for bringing up South Africa. I think that's a really good example where we've seen in 2019 was a picture where when they had issues with electricity, they had issues with the economy and the growth of the economy. Yeah. And when I read things like that, it begs the question, at what rate would a lot of African economies grow were they to increase the electricity generation? Yeah. It really is, it's sad to say, but in some level, some of it is actually quite pedestrian. We're not even talking about the high level issues now. Yeah. Increased generation, you will increase the economic growth. Indeed. That will have an impact on jobs, etc., etc.
In fact, so much benefits there, but the will and the mindset is just an issue. Let's talk about the aviation now. Ethiopian Airlines, they're thinking about a new airport proposal. Business must be good, you think?
Well, did we say will and mindset? I think this is another great example of statement of intent. And I think this is a strategic statement of intent on many levels, not just about the fact that they're looking to build this new airport. So one, it's a private company saying, we're trying to build this airport.
And I was just thinking, how many private companies, aviation companies, actually will do that? Especially in this part of the world.
Having said that, it does beg the question, okay, how's it going to be funded? How are they going to ensure that this doesn't end up being a white elephant project and essentially it's a viable project? But putting that aside, not that it's a small issue, but putting that aside for the purpose of this conversation, they're telling you they're looking at a capacity of 100 million, right? Yeah. The Dubai airport, which, as we know, is a very significant and strategic hub, they've expanded. Their Vision 2020 was to go from 60 million to 90 million. So Ethiopian Airlines is telling you that I'm going to build an airport that is larger than Dubai. Wow. They've already surpassed Dubai in terms of being a hub for Africans traveling. But they're telling you that they're going to push themselves even further. Yeah. And I love that. I think that's a fantastic ambition. They just need to ensure that, one, it is well funded, the structure of the funding, so that this doesn't put upon them a debt burden that they later regret, and ensure that they can generate the revenues to be able to cover the funding that they've had to take.
Very good. Now, let's talk about the advantages of airlines actually towing the path of what Ethiopian Airlines is actually doing in terms of having that mindset to build airports, and probably not just building it, but running it as well.
Well, I'm glad you used the second term. Well, one does have to see the business case for this. I have it. But the reality is that the airport, I don't know if it's pronounced Bole or whatever, B-O-L-E, the airport, to my mind, has been a bit of a limiting factor for Ethiopian Airlines. I don't know if you've ever flown through there, but certainly when I did about 4 years ago, it wasn't great. Okay. I know that they've since expanded. They almost tripled the capacity to about 22 million passengers. And if Ethiopian Airlines, from what they're saying, can already foresee that in 3 to 4 years, they would have outgrown the airport. And this is an airport that the Ethiopian government have already expanded, and I think there's still some more expansion planned. then they've had to look and say, okay, what alternative do we have?
Yeah.
And then I must admit, I am one of these private sector people who does actually believe that for a lot of things, private sector can actually run certain institutions and infrastructure assets better than government. So, you know, they're I'm sure, a very strong case for them to do what they're trying to do.
Very good. And still talking about collaboration between the private sector and the government itself. So what does this tell you about the government's plans on economic reform? You know, we've just seen a classic example on the aviation sector, which has also gotten international appraisal about Ethiopia's reform efforts as well. So what do you make of that development?
Well, the Ethiopian government a lot of praises. They've been doing quite well. They've seemed quite visionary and strategic in terms of how they're trying to take things forward. So again, I'm sure that Ethiopian Airlines are not just looking at their own plans in isolation, but just looking at the overall plans for Ethiopia as a whole and trying to ensure that they have the supporting infrastructure to facilitate that.
Okay, on a final word, so how do you see this on long term? All these developments regarding, you know, the Ethiopian Airlines, you know, when you see or hear of their activities, they seem to be going from strength to strength.
Well, it makes me think that fast forward a few years, I would be seriously considering using Ethiopian Airlines to fly to other parts of the world and not just limit myself to either the Middle Eastern Airlines or the European Airlines. Because, as I said, the airport I personally didn't like at the time. It just really wasn't, let's just say it did the airline a disservice. But I'm sure they've done some work on it since then.
Indeed, and on that note, Sanyade Okoli, I'd like to thank you very much for your thoughts on this issue. It's good to have you as always.
Thank you, Nini.